Cool. Okay. Live streaming is working. I'm just configuring something. Okay. Can anyone hear me? Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
Sorry. So I've been doing some admin stuff, so it's should be streaming on YouTube as well. just pause the recording. Doesn't really make sense to record it and stream it as well. It's like strange watching yourself being streamed at the same time as being on here. Cool. Let's give it a few more minutes. I think there was 34 people signed up. Hi, Bonnie.
Hey, Craig.
How's it going?
All right. How are you?
Not too bad. Busy day as per usual. Busy week. Busy 2 weeks. Had lots of fun trying to get a speaker who then got COVID and then was unavailable. Luckily, we've managed to rope in Sarah.
Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you.
I think this is
Just
the
ordered
first.
my pizza for the meeting. Annoyed that they have a minimum order amount you have to have for delivery. They don't let you just pay for the delivery. You have to buy stuff you don't want.
Yeah, I guess that. I'm guessing it's not really financially viable if you just say you want a £12 pizza. They've got to.
Well, it would be if you paid them for the delivery.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same with most things. Even like Just Eat, it's like a minimum of £15, and it's like I just want like a chicken chow mein, and then I've got to buy a drink and then like rice. It's like, what am I going to do with rice? I don't want that. I think once I bought 4 bags of prawn crackers just to try and boost the.
They can't last
amount.
very long. Don't they get mushy?
Yeah, they go. I'm going to say soft is the word they go
Yeah.
after a while. Okay. Does somebody enable closed caption?
That's what I saw.
Let's give it as well. Shall I turn it off?
So hoping someone from PHP Foundation will turn up so I can ask what happened about the read-only amendments. RFC.
What was that? Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
I'm also hoping if someone from the PHP Foundation turns up, I can ask them what happened to the read-only amendments. RFC. That seems to have dropped off the radar.
Was there a vote on it, or was it just
No, there wasn't a vote. It was
lost
just
on
discussion, and then it seemed to go quiet.
It's like most RFCs, I guess.
But I think one of the authors was a paid foundation person.
I only know Derek and George who are paid.
Yeah, it wasn't one of them. It's not someone that comes to this meetup. Well, on YouTube we have a whole one person, which I think is me actually. We're streaming on YouTube and I've got it open in the browser. Just currently me. Well worth upgrading Zoom for that whole me watching the live stream. I wonder if it makes sense to be streaming on YouTube before the talk starts. Don't know.
How does it? Oh, 2 people watching. Okay. The other people joining. then we had like 34 people sign up, which is not too bad for an online 35. Not too bad for 3 days notice or something, or 2 days notice. I'm looking forward to the talk. 20 years is is a long time to be writing PHP. I think I've been writing it for.
Isn't that about the longest possible time to have been writing PHP?
I think so. Yeah, it's old school.
I think
No, I'm not
PHP is
saying
30 years old at this point.
Is it?
A little bit older, maybe.
Created in 1994.
For yeah.
Yeah, 28 years or something like that.
What pizza you getting, Ronnie?
It's going to have artichoke hearts, tomato sauce, can't remember what else, peppers.
So this veggie. Are you a veggie?
Yeah, yes.
Ooh, okay. A few more people are arriving. Is anyone else alive? Everyone's lurking in the background. Almost a weekend. It's time. Anyone on the meetings? Is this the first time they've been to PHP event, whether online or in person? You can, you know. If the silence means yes, we've been before. Don't know. Oh, there's reactions. I've not used it for so long. Now I realise why I don't use Zoom.
I don't
Why
use
is
Zoom.
that?
Well, we use Teams at work, which is equally shit.
I think
Dylan
Teams is my
Beatty's
least
got
favorite piece of software.
Yeah, Dylan Beatty's got a good song about how shit Teams is.
I remember well, it's probably a couple of years ago. 'Cause I had like, my main laptop was Linux, and it was like there was no native app, so I was running like some Electron app, which is just like running it in the browser. It was just terrible. Like all the audio and video, it's just rubbish.
I've also seen people say they consider Teams malware because it can grab focus when things happen and then take your keyboard input.
Oh, when people are speaking, you can, or just
I don't know, like if you're just working on something else and then someone sends you something through Teams, it can apparently do something, grab your focus and then start taking what you're typing on the keyboard into Teams. It pops itself up into the foreground.
Oh, like if someone sends you an attachment, you mean? You put an aware thing. Or is it just
I don't know if someone starts a chat with you or something, I think. I'm not sure.
not sure either? Oh, it's quite a few people. Let me let me reopen a few things. A bit ill prepared. Share my screen. You all see my screen?
Yep.
So yes.
PHP London.
Cool. I just wanted to test out this was working. Cool. Can you still see my screen?
Yes.
I'll just stop back in. Sarah, are you able to quickly share your screen if I gave you
Sure.
option to do that? I think I need to make, if I make you the host. Make change. Right. Just need to test that this is working.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah, I can see your
We
screen.
can.
Good. You probably need me to make you the host again, right?
Yes, please. Yeah, I don't think you can have more than one. Thank you. Is anyone going to the conference, PHP UK? No.
Have they released their schedule yet?
Yes, it is in. Yeah, is it Valentine's Day? 14th and 15th of February. Not an ideal date.
Mm.
I'm not sure if my wife will be happy that I'll be at a conference.
Yeah, probably not me.
Might need to speak to some. Yeah, there's probably a reason why. It's probably cheaper, but I think the big problem for a lot of people was it's half term as well, I think. So people, lots of children at home. Maybe that's why it was a bit cheaper to book. Yeah, only 5 minutes. Cool. Like it could be all of us. How many is there? 15. Okay, let's give it a couple more minutes and then we can probably start. Don't want to. I can remember last time, Barney, when we had these, it was like 9 p.m. when we were finishing.
Yeah. Sounds
It's
good.
it's a long day. It's like 12 hours being on a computer. So
Yeah, I've been working from home all day today as well.
yeah, me too. Did manage to walk to Tesco, and then it absolutely sloshed it down on the way back. It's the joys of living in the middle of nowhere.
Going to have to duck out to get my pizza in the middle of the talk. So don't be offended if I disappear.
It's okay. I'll mute you that way.
Yeah, I'll try and keep myself muted when I'm not talking.
I'm very hungry. Well, I think this is probably everyone. So Cool, bang on 7. Okay, I guess we'll start. So you can still all see my screen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So welcome. Oop, someone's just entering. Bang on time. Cool. So welcome to our January 2023 event. Apologies for the lateness of the announcement, and I know it's not in person, but Sarah's kindly managed to help us out here and do a talk for tonight. So a couple of housekeeping before sorry, sponsors. Apologies for the logos. Black on black text is not particularly easy to see, but yeah, I think Levi's here from Explore. So yeah, thanks to our sponsors who would usually provide the pizzas and the drinks, but their ongoing support helps us pay for things like Zoom as well. So yeah, Explore. So if anyone is hiring or looking for a new role, please check out Explore, and also Ticket Tailor as well, who are also one of our sponsors. Just a quick, I guess, if anyone is looking to sponsor, we're always open to sponsors. So if you wanted to get in touch, just message me on Twitter or a DM or whatever. If you're looking to hire as well, or just want to help the the group out in general, always looking for money to help promote us. Cool, next one. So we do have a code of conduct. So if you're unsure about what that is and what it involves, it covers both in-person and online events. So it's mainly just being a bit sensible, avoid any harassment, any kind of off-the-cuff remarks that someone could offend someone. So yeah, if you're unsure, just have a read of that. It's on our website. We're also on Slack. Well, I say, yeah, it's a bit of a barren wasteland at times, but we do have a Slack group. So if you want to copy this link down, it should open up another form where you just fill in some information, and then it should sign you up to Slack. I do try and announce events or any changes on Slack. Does
Both of those links in the chat in case people want to.
Yeah, just a word of warning though. It's not a place to spam for jobs. So if you are hiring, any kind of hiring jobs that you post will be removed. More of a place where we can chat about things. If you are looking to hire, then obviously there's other ways of doing that. And speakers. If any of you have something interesting to talk about, we do have a link here as well. That should take you to a Google form where you can just fill out. I think it just asks you a couple of questions and what months that you would be available for. Because obviously we have to try and get speakers lined up as early as we can. So yeah, I think it gives you an option of like 4 months. You can choose whichever month you can, and then obviously that just gives us a bit of an easier time to schedule you in for that particular month that you're available. So yeah, so okay, I might need to fix that Slack thing then, Barney, if it's not working. Okay, yeah, okay, great. Maybe because I didn't keep my Heroku running. Cool. Cool. I think that's pretty much it in terms of announcements. Again, the conference will be the PHP UK conference. It's going to be the 14th and the 15th Tickets are still available. I'm not quite sure what the price is, but I think they are fairly affordable if you would like to go. So it's 2 days of conference, and there's also, I think on the 13th there's a workshop, choice of 2 workshops as well. So if you were interested in more kind of hands-on learning instead of just sitting watching talks, there's the option as well to do some hands-on workshops. I think one of them's on testing, which is always good to learn. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it in terms of what I'm going to be saying. So yeah, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our speaker tonight. So I know it's remotely, but all the way from the US. I'd like to welcome Sarah, who's going to be going over her 20 years of experience. So I'd like to welcome Sarah.
Well, thank you. Let me share my screen. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
I can.
Great.
Sorry, I think.
All right. So this is 20 lessons from 20 years of PHP. So who am I? I'm Sarah Savage. You may know me by former name. I've been developing PHP since 2003, so that's 20 years this year. I've developed, the first thing I wrote was a game and then a custom blogging platform because I couldn't understand WordPress. And then I've done work for a lot of different people. I've also written 3 books. If you want to tweet at me or hit me up on Mastodon, those are the links to do so. Happy to answer questions after the talk or even during if you have them. In the last 20 years, a lot of things have changed in PHP. There have been a number of things that have come out. 20 years ago, the version of PHP that we were using was version 4.3. It came out in 2003. And it was just about a year later in 2004 that PHP 5 came out, 5.0, the very first version of PHP 5. And, you know, that was revolutionary. It introduced a new object model and it had a lot of improvements and it made a lot of changes. But of course, all the web hosts at the time were still, you know, dealing with PHP 4. So that was what was out at the time. And then in 2005, PHP 5.1 came out, shortly followed by 5.2. And somewhere in there, PHP 6 was conceived of and then ultimately abandoned. And PHP kind of stalled a little bit. And nothing kind of happened for a long time in the PHP world. PHP 5.2 was the most stable release, and there was talk that PHP was dying all the way back then. And so nothing was changing. However, there were things that were coming out around this time. So in 2007, both Symfony and Zen Framework had their first releases. And then after PHP 6 was essentially rejected, a lot of the changes that PHP 6 introduced that weren't Unicode related were introduced as PHP 5.3. So name spacing and closures and things that we've all come to be familiar with were released in June of 2009. In 2010, the PHP community got together and had a conversation about how we were going to release software. That was that conversation that took place basically decided that we were going to have an annual release cycle for PHP. We were going to release code every year. And we were going to have major releases, minor releases, how we were going to version the software. Around this time in 2011, Laravel was released. The first version of Laravel was released. I had to dig really deep to find out what version of Laravel was 1.0. But you know, it is what it is. And then 5.4 came out in 2012. 5.5 shortly thereafter followed in 2013. In 2014, PHP elected to skip version 6. So we were talking about PHP Next, and we were talking about what are we going to do? How are we going to deal with this? You know, version 6 was already written about. People had expected it. People knew what it was supposed to be about. And then all of a sudden, we decided to abandon it. What did we do? And there was a lot of different discussions about what to do about it. For the record, I voted against skipping version 6. I was wrong. I'm happy to admit that. Version 7 has worked out just fine. It was a somewhat of a contentious election. Using the new rules, I don't think it would have passed for version 7, but I'm happy that it did. And then in 2014, PHP 5.6 was released. That is the last version of PHP 5 that was released. A year later, PHP 7 came out, and this was revolutionary. It introduced a lot of new features into PHP, a lot of which we've built on in the last few years. So PHP 7 is now 8 years old, basically, or 7 years old almost, so a little older than 7 years. In 2018, December of 2018, PHP 5 was officially retired. That was 4 years ago. 4 years, 5 years. Anyway, it's a few years ago now. So if you still have applications on PHP 5, it's time to upgrade because that was a very long time ago. That was the last security release. And then in 2020, Zen Framework became Laminus. And then November of 2020, we released PHP 8. Again, a lot of great new features. And then bringing us up to current times, Laravel 9 was released last year. PHP 7 was retired last year. Symfony released its latest version 6.2. And then in December, just last month, PHP 8.2 was released. And they're planning on 8.3 this year at some point. So that's a lot of change over the last 20 years. There's been many conversations saying, well, PHP is dead. PHP will never rise from the grave. PHP will never be anything special or new. And PHP is gone. If I had money for every time someone said that, I'd be able to retire. I wouldn't be a software developer anymore. But as all of you know, PHP has survived. And so I have written probably thousands, if not millions of lines of PHP code. And this talk is about the things that I've learned. This is not a technical talk. There's not any code in it. This is more of a keynote style conversation about the things that I have learned as a software developer, the things that you don't learn when you go to college or when you become a professional engineer. So without further ado, let's dive into the 20 things I have learned in the last 20 years. So first, programming is part skill and part art. And I like to describe coding as a craft, okay? So when you write code, the computer is the one who interprets that code, but the human is the one who reads that code and changes that code and understands that code. Code is not merely a collection of ones and zeros. That software that you've written is not merely a set of commands that a processor needs to execute. It's a way of communicating with another developer. It's a way of expressing yourself to another developer. And there's a craft in developing code that's readable and reusable and understandable. If we wanted to, we could simply write, binary lines of code and have those binary lines talk to the processor without anything. We could use there's a few different programming languages, some of which are not family friendly names that we could use to mess with our colleagues, but we don't choose to use them. We could choose to use Perl. That's right. So these languages, that exist, we choose not to use them. We choose to use expressive languages, and code is a craft. So, for those who are beginners, it is key to understand that this is a craft. This isn't science. This is art. It's a skill for sure, but it's also a piece of artwork. It's a piece of creativity. It's like writing literature. It's less mathematics and more more literature. So this is something that took me a long time to learn. I thought, well, code is executed by computers and I don't need to worry about how the code looks until I have to go back and look at it. But the reality is we're writing code for people, and people are the ones who have to understand it. The other thing I learned early on in my career is that there's plenty of work in PHP. I've worked for dozens of companies as an employee, as a consultant, as a contractor. There's so much work to be had out there. Even if you don't like a particular framework or you don't like a particular style of coding, there are billions and billions of lines of PHP code in the world. These are just some of the companies that I've worked for in my career. A very small subset of the companies I've worked for. They're the ones you probably will recognize, and then there's a lot that you would have never heard of. But what this means is two things. One, there is a lot of work out there if you want it. The second thing this means is that every one of these big companies that you see listed here that I've worked for, I have done PHP work for. These people are using PHP. If I had a slide of all the companies that you've probably heard of that use PHP, there wouldn't be any white space left on the slide because pretty much every major company in the world is using PHP in some way, shape, or form. Even the companies that we talked to when I worked for Perforce that said we are looking to get away from PHP, we're like, great, but you're using it now, right? And I think that one of the biggest lies in software is we're going to retire that in the next 2 years. I hear it all the time. I don't know that it's ever been true that somebody's actually retired something in the last 2 years. If somebody's using PHP, chances are in 2 years, they're still going to be using PHP. And there is a ton of work out there for PHP developers. So how do you find this work? And for me, the key that I had to learn was building a network. Building a network is something that takes time and effort, but is well worth it and is, in my opinion, the key to having a long-term career, especially in this field. Networking and building that network, every job I've had and every contract I've had in the last 10 years has come through the network of people that I've worked with. And that network has been significant in providing me with opportunities. So if you are working on building your network, keep doing it. There are some ways that you can accomplish this. There are some things that you can do. First of all, you can go to user groups. Congratulations. Every single one of you is here, which is great. Keep going to user groups. Find user groups, find affinity groups that you match up with and attend them. Even if you're a beginner at something, if you are a beginner at Python or you're a beginner at Rust, find a group that you know and you can build a network with. Go to the conferences that are offered. PHP UK is a great opportunity. There's a PHP Day in Italy, and there's a few other conferences in Europe that I'm not as familiar with that you can attend and go to. And I highly recommend attending conferences as a means of expanding your network. It's a great opportunity. And if you want to speak at these conferences, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, take the opportunity to submit. PHP Day right now is open. So definitely take a look at that. And then, of course, online. You can go on Reddit or Twitter. I built a following on Twitter. Facebook is an opportunity. LinkedIn is a great place to grow a professional network, to connect with the people you've worked with. The last 2 or 3 contracts I've gotten have come through LinkedIn connections. And so it's a great opportunity to build that network. Now, a lot of these are US focused, but there's a lot of opportunities to grow networks. And then, of course, there's meetups and things like that you can participate in. And as you develop your career, you'll find that the relationships you build are the most important thing that you have for finding new roles and growing your business or growing your experience. So I promised you in the talk abstract that I would talk to you about what it takes to be a senior developer. So if you're new to software development or you're looking to level up, there are a few ways that you can do this. But for the most part, the difference between a junior and a senior developer is that a senior developer focuses on solving business problems. So the business problems that I'm talking about here are the problems that the company you're working for has. So junior developers, I wrote something called the parable of the pinata. If you Google it, you'll find it on my blog under my dead name. And the parable of the pinata is a story about a junior engineer versus a senior engineer, and the idea that the junior engineer doesn't know where to start hanging a pinata, and the mid-level engineer develops this entirely sophisticated system with pulleys and cranks and all this. But the senior engineer looks at the problem and says, all we need to do is we need to hang this pinata outside on a tree. By the way, if you're not muted, can you go ahead and mute yourself? There's a little bit of background noise. Thank you. So when you're a senior developer, the key is to focus on solving the business problems. I like to say as a developer, my job is to solve business problems. Sometimes I solve them with code. A junior developer is going to focus on the code, but the senior developer, the architect, the staff engineer, they're going to focus on solving business problems for the business that they're working with. And whether those business problems come with software that they've written, whether they come with a software as a service that you recommend, no matter how you get to that finish line, that's the end goal. All right. So I want to know, if you want to put in the chat, who here likes Laravel over all the other frameworks? Anybody? Okay. Anybody a fan of Symfony over all the other frameworks? You can just put Symfony in the chat. Any Symfony fans? How about Zen Framework or Mezio, or anybody like that? I'm a Mezio fan personally, but that's neither here nor there. I see we have kind of a split between Laravel and Symfony, which is great. So those two frameworks are kind of head to head in the PHP space. So let's settle this debate once and for all. I'm going to tell you what the best framework is for developing your software, okay? We're going to settle this debate. So the best framework for writing code and for solving your problem is to, the best framework is the one that serves your business interests. Okay. Now, that might be kind of a letdown because you're hoping that I'm going to say, oh, Laravel is the best, or Symfony is the best, or Mezio is the best, or some other framework is the best. But really, the best framework is the one that gets the job done for you and resolves the issues that you're having as quickly and as efficiently as possible. If you love Laravel, that's fantastic. If you love Symfony, that's great too. If you're a Laminus Mezio person like me, that's cool. You're allowed to have opinions about the frameworks that you use. But I can tell you from experience, I've used every framework in PHP. I've even used the ones that nobody's ever heard of, like Aura. Some of these frameworks that nobody's ever heard of. I've written a framework in PHP called Modus. So I've been there, done that. And it's okay to have opinions. There's nothing wrong with having opinions. There's nothing wrong with having preferences. But it's important to remember that the framework that you're using is less important than the business problems that you're solving. It's important to remember that solving the problem that the business has is going to be the key and the thing that you want to do first and foremost as a developer. So it's okay to have opinions. It's okay to have preferences. It's okay, as someone says, there's a lot of Laravel roles in recruitment right now. That's definitely true. It's okay to have a preference for Laravel or Symfony or Mezio or Aura or whatever. But remember that the goal is to solve the business problem. So it's probably as controversial as I'll get today, just so you know. All right, so number 6. Perfect is the enemy of the good or good enough. If you have unshipped code that's currently not doing anything for your customers, code that's not doing anything for the business, it doesn't do you any good. It's worthless. It's not worth anything at all because it's not doing anything for you. The only code that actually is valuable is code that's in production. And I'm not saying that that means it's a waste of time to develop things or to experiment or to, test things out. What I am saying is if you've written a feature, but it's sitting unshipped because it's not perfect enough for you, it's not helping you move your business forward. It's not helping you move the goals of the business forward. So what I like to do instead of searching for perfection is incremental change or shipping good things and making them better later on. I saw a great thread the other day on Twitter, and I wish I'd grabbed it. It was a thread of changes that Stripe has made recently to over the last year to improve customer experience. For example, Stripe improved the page load of the documentation something like 50% because half of the page load was spent loading the navigation bar on the left side of the page. So they put that in an in-memory cache, so it only had to be generated one time. That significantly improved the load speed of the page. So it's possible to take something that already works and make it a little better, but if they waited to ship the documentation until it was perfect, then there'd be no documentation and it still wouldn't necessarily work. Ahmed says, how to decide if this framework has solved the business problem? I think it maybe depends on the programming language, not the framework, because it's all built on the same framework. Sometimes the programming language does matter. Picking the right tool for the job is definitely something that you want to do. You want to pick the right tool for the job. If you're doing a lot of complex calculations, for example, on the command line, I'd probably pick something like Python or Rust over something, say, like PHP. So picking the right tool does have a significant impact. But in terms of like PHP frameworks, they're all roughly the same. They all accomplish essentially at the end of the day the same thing. So you're right. Sometimes language matters too. So that's a good point. So the truth of the matter is I learned very early on in my career, I always know enough about something to teach it to someone else. And the best way to know if you know something is, in fact, to teach it. If you are in a place where you're learning something, teaching it to someone else is going to help clarify the parts of what you're learning that you don't fully understand yet. And this is where I encourage people to step out and speak. There was a slide earlier that had a link to sign up to speak to this meetup group. I encourage everybody here to take advantage of that link. You know something that somebody else doesn't know. You know something that somebody else can take advantage of and learn from. Just because you've not spoken before or just because you're new at something doesn't mean you can't have something to share and that you don't have anything of value to say. Because if you are experimenting and learning and growing, chances are good you've learned something that someone else has not yet taken advantage of learning. So step out and teach it, share it with someone else. And if you want to know how well you understand something, teach it to somebody, because when you teach it to them and they say, well, what about this? Or I don't understand this, or this wasn't clear, and you realize it's not clear to you either, that's a moment for you to reflect and go back and say, hey, let me learn more about this particular area. Let me learn more about what it is that I need clarity on. And you will find the areas that you want to clarify and improve on as part of learning that particular subject. Lawrence or Barney Lawrence, you had a question?
I just posted a question in the chat from the frameworks thing. Do you think there's any truth to the perception of Laravel is more suited to rapid application development, and other frameworks is more suited to more long-term sustained development?
I think that Laravel specifically makes itself, I think that Laravel makes it easy to develop quickly. I think that if I think you can write good code in any framework. I think you can write bad code in any framework. I think Laravel makes it easy to develop because it offers a lot of helpers and it offers a lot of features and it does a lot of things that, say, for Mezio, you have to plug in yourself. For Symfony, it takes a lot of configuration to do. For Laravel, it just does it. Like, it just works. That can come with some benefits. It does make it easier to prototype. It can come with some drawbacks. It makes it easier to write what I would consider to be challenging code, because it offers some chances to write code that maybe isn't factored in a way that encourages good solid principles or good principles of software development. That's not the fault of the framework. That is a direct involvement of the programmer or the software developer. So I think that if it's easy to criticize a framework and say, well, this framework does that, or this framework allows this, but I can write really bad code in Mezio and I can run really great code in Laravel. It doesn't make any difference what framework I'm using. I can still do it. So I think it really comes down to the developer. Does that answer your question?
I think so, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So as you're teaching, the other thing to do is to always know that someone else knows more than you, and be humble. I remember there was a conference talk that was given a long time ago by someone on a topic. I think I can't remember exactly what the topic was, but I do remember that the person who wrote the feature was literally sitting in the front row. It wasn't my talk, but the person who wrote the feature was sitting in the front row. Now, how intimidating would that be if you were to give a talk on Laravel and Taylor Otwell comes and sits in the front row of your talk? I think that would be intimidating to just about anyone. But the speaker took an opportunity to turn it into a discussion with the person who was the expert in the field because they'd written the feature. And what ended up happening was a great conversation about, the feature and its forward progress and its development potential and how it could help and things like that. And I think, that was a great way to stay humble. This person had done a lot of research and prepared a conversation and prepared a talk. But they took an opportunity to let someone who may have known something else that they didn't know share that knowledge with the group for the betterment of the group. And while they still shared the material that they'd prepared, they were open to learning more from, as why something was designed a certain way or why something worked a certain way, things that they weren't clear on, things that maybe weren't obvious. So it's important to remember that someone else is always going to know more about something than you do, and that you want to be humble and take the opportunity to learn from them. Because the truth is that a good developer never stops learning. Every time I write code, every time I look at code, every time I open up someone else's code, I get excited because I'm going to learn something new. I'm going to see something I haven't seen before. And in 20 years, I've seen a lot of code. I mean, I've probably looked at millions of lines of code in my career, and yet I'm always learning something new. People have had new ideas or new ways of implementing a design pattern or something like that, I'm always learning something new. And I think that's really exciting. It's really fun. The creativity of the software development industry is remarkable. I worked with someone to instrument some code so that we could get metrics out of it, and we were able to hook in. It was a Laravel project, and we were able to hook into the dependency injection container and figure out how we could use attributes. And this was a whole new project, and it was really fantastic to be able to do that. And I had never done it before. I'd not used attributes yet. I hadn't used the Laravel DI containers hook that it runs every time it creates an object. We were using that to read the attributes and inspect the object. So it was a really great opportunity to learn, and I learned a lot from doing that. And so I encourage you, you will never stop learning. So don't stop learning. But the other side of that coin is I encourage you to become an expert at something, because the more knowledge you gain, the better off you'll be as a software developer. The more valuable you'll be, the more experience you have, the more you can take a look at something and go, yeah, I've seen that before. I've seen something similar. It doesn't matter what you become an expert in. It's front end, back end, DevOps. Just become an expert. Learn about something. Specialize. And for a lot of people, they say, "Well, I don't want to specialize. I don't want to be an expert." Because if I'm an expert at back end, for example, then the front end stuff gets away from me, and no one will ever hire me unless I'm a full stack engineer. I don't think that's true. I think that there are opportunities for people who are back-end engineers or front-end engineers or DevOps people to have roles and opportunities where their expertise is necessary. I have a cursory understanding of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I have extensive knowledge of how to build an API. So if you're building an API, I'm probably the person to call. If you want me to design your website, that's probably not what I'm going to be good at. But that expertise, there's a lot of APIs being developed. There's a lot of things being developed, and I've become an expert in writing PHP, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's good to know a little bit about a lot of things, but it's also good to have a deep knowledge of what you are good at and what you are passionate about, and to focus on those things, because that expertise will help you significantly as a developer, as someone who's valuable to a company, as someone who's valuable in their career, and someone who's growing as a senior or an architect or something like that. But even as you grow that expertise, I encourage you to always consistently embrace the joy of being a beginner. If you remember back to when you were first learning to program, the joy of your first program actually running, the joy of seeing your code actually function for the very first time, that's a hard thing to keep, right? Like, the more consistently our code runs, the more we write code, the less we have that joy, that experience of happiness that our code is working. It's just like, it just becomes ordinary. It becomes every day. Well, the way you solve for this is you keep trying new things. You keep growing yourself as a software developer. For example, I taught myself Python. I've taught myself Ansible. I've taught myself JavaScript. I've taught myself CSS, and I've taught myself Linux. I've taught myself all of these things, because the first time, even if you're doing shell scripting, which is in my opinion, a terrible language, the first time it runs and works the way you expect it to, that there's joy in that. The first time you run an Ansible script and configure a box from start to finish with no errors, there's joy in that. There's joy in the new things and the fresh perspectives. And I'm always learning new things because I want to keep that joy in the work that I do. And I've learned that it's important to do that in order to keep the passion for software development and to keep the passion for developing applications. But as you learn, I encourage you to study the documentation, to really study the documentation, to take a hard look at it, and to learn and to drive yourself forward in terms of actually learning how the software or the tools you're using actually work. I try and set aside a little time every day to learn a new function in PHP. This isn't hard, considering that there's 365 days in a year. If I exclude the weekends, then there's however many days left after that. PHP has thousands of functions, so I'm probably never going to get to all of them. But I can't tell you how many times I've looked at something in the documentation, read about it, played with it a little bit, and then a week later needed it. Realized I now have this tool in my toolkit. It's helpful to me. It's useful because it's there, and now I can use it. And so I definitely highly recommend taking a little time to just study the documentation, look through an extension you've never used, look through something you've never heard of, look through something that you think, oh, I'll never need this, because you never know when you will. You never know when someone comes to you and says, take a look at this, and you go, oh yeah, I have experience with that now. So study the documentation. The other thing I highly recommend for learning and continuous learning is to read other people's code. Lots of other people's code. Read code extensively. How many people do code reviews? By, I guess, say something in the chat. Anybody do code reviews? Okay. So for those of you who do code reviews, remember that doing a code review is as much about learning from the code that you're reading as about ensuring the quality of the code that you're allowing to be committed. Sometimes we think of a code review as an opportunity to prevent bad code or insecure code or buggy code from going into production. That's sort of true, but I can have a compiler and a unit test tell me whether or not my code has bugs in it. Okay. Code reviews are about, consistency and sharing with the team and having people take a look at a code and having a second set of eyes look over something and make suggestions. But it's also about learning from the other developers on the team, because every time you read someone else's code, you're going to learn something new. You're going to see a different thought process from your own, and you're going to have a different perspective. That perspective is valuable because it allows you to open your mind and to see how someone else is thinking. Those are important perspectives to have. So, when you do a code review, think of it less as an opportunity to ensure code quality, but more of an opportunity to learn something from someone else, because they're incredibly useful. All right. Next. I thought when I started my career that I needed to master a PHP, the language PHP. But as I matured as a developer, I realized that what was important is the programming concepts like solid and dry and Yagni and the concepts of programming, the things about programming that make up all languages, not just PHP. If I understand solid, I can look at a program in Python or Rust or any other object-oriented language, and I can understand whether or not code is solid or not solid based on my understanding of those principles. I don't have to understand every idiom. I don't have to understand everything about the code, but I do, if I understand that principle, I can tell you, yes, this is good code, or no, this code could be refactored in these ways. There are certain design paradigms that are going to be specific to every language, and there are design patterns that may be specific to specific languages. But on the whole, the Gang of Four book of design patterns, the solid principles, the law of Demeter, all of those things translate across software for all object-oriented languages. And you can apply them to most object-oriented languages. So by learning the concepts, you give yourself a leg up in terms of whether or not you can step into another language. And being able to step into another language, even some of the things that you're not is familiar with, being able to step into that language and understand what's going on is a very valuable skill, especially for someone who is senior. So bottom line is languages come and go. There will be a day when PHP goes the way of Fortran. It's not going to be today, and it's probably not going to be tomorrow, but at some point people will not really choose to write PHP anymore. It will happen. It always happens. Every language gets replaced by something else. That's okay. But the concepts will last you much longer. I put forever here. They may not be forever. Barney is right. Some solid is kind of controversial. But I think that the principles and the concepts that you learn will translate into other languages much easier. So yeah. I also learned in my career that the best thing you can possibly do in writing software is to be boring. And what I mean by this is that boring stacks don't break quite as easily. I have watched a lot of technologies come and go. I watched MongoDB be born. I watched the jokes about MongoDB that came across needing two mugs to hold the coffee if you had a MongoDB mug. I've seen all of that come and go. I was there when Redis was born. I was there when RabbitMQ was born. I was there when ActiveMQ was born. I was there when AWS was born. Okay, I've been doing this a long time. I have seen technologies come and go, become popular. I went to talks at PHP user groups where people were like, Mongo is the future, document databases are the future. And what's the first thing everybody does when they see a document database? They replace it with a SQL database. SQL databases have been around for a long time. They're not going anywhere. My point is, it might be fun to jump on the latest technology, but not all technologies are going to be around for a long time. And when you tie yourself to a specific type of technology, you are making a business decision to support that technology for as long as the application exists, or to pay off the technical debt when that technology ceases to exist. That's important to realize, because let's say you jump on something that's invented today, and 2 years from now, they either completely redesign it to do something else, or they just discontinue it because open source is difficult and people jump out of it all the time. Well, if it's a mission critical application, you now have this technology that you must support or must remove. Either way, it's going to cost you money as a business to deal with this technology. There are proven technologies that have been around for a long time. MySQL is a classic one. MySQL has a cost of support, but we generally know what that cost is. PHP has a cost of support. We generally know what that cost is. Nginx or Apache has a known cost. The typical stacks have known cost. Redis, queues, those kind of things have known cost associated with them, and we can budget for those. We can plan for those. The truth of the matter is, you can build a lot of really interesting things with a boring stack. Before it switched over to Hack, I think it was Hack or HHVM, Facebook was written in PHP. It had a MySQL backend. It popularized Memcache before Redis was invented. So Facebook was built with a very boring, what we would consider to be a very boring stack today. And it serves billions of people around the world. You might think of Facebook now as mundane, but at the time it was really revolutionary. I mean, I was there when Facebook was still a college specific thing, right? So, but they built this platform with a very boring stack. So, that's something to keep in mind. You can build a lot of really cool things with a boring stack. So take it for what it's worth. Moving away a little from these recommendations to a little bit of the softer skills. Something I learned in my career is that integrity in software development is everything. And for me, integrity is the state of being honest. And when I say honest, I'm implying that you are going to tell it like it is, and you're going to be truthful with those who depend on you. Nobody wins if you cut an estimate in order to fit a deadline, but fail to meet the deadline anyway. Nobody wins if you pull your punches, if you appease your boss just to make them happy, but you don't actually get done what needs to be done. The truth of the matter is that being honest and being a legitimate software developer who says, you know what, I know you have a deadline of next week. It's actually going to take 2 weeks to do that thing. We can cut down the feature set, or we can extend the deadline, but we can't do the current feature set in the time that you've given us. There's a lot of risk in that, but there's a lot of integrity in being the software developer who stands up and says that and is honest and says, you know what, it says diplomatically, you know what, we can't do that. That is not possible. or in being the one who says, you know what, we can do that. We are going to achieve that because I know from my experience that we can do that. I know that this is possible. When everyone else thinks it's impossible, being willing to say, yes, it is possible. I know how we can do that is also a sign of integrity. So the truth is that harder conversations don't get easier with time. Having a hard conversation with your boss sometimes means sharing difficult things with that boss. Sometimes it means trade-offs. Sometimes it means having those tough conversations and making decisions about features or things that you're going to build. And this doesn't get easier with a delay. In fact, it gets harder with a delay, because if you have a deadline and you have a feature set, every day that goes by that you're not meeting that feature set, you're getting further behind. So being upfront about what's possible and being upfront about how you're going to do this and what you're going to actually be able to accomplish, or what trade-offs need to be made in order to achieve the goals and the objectives, those are conversations that you need to have early. Barney points out that in dysfunctional organizations, he thinks people sometimes do win when you cut your estimates because they get to blame you for missing the deadlines, and he's right. So in dysfunctional organizations, a lot of times you'll see blame games or politics. Those are organizations I strongly advise people to not be a part of, because dysfunction is one of those things that is prevalent in the software industry. As I said on the first slide, there's plenty of work in the PHP world. The second slide, there's plenty of work in the PHP world. So, if you're in a dysfunctional organization, there's nothing wrong with saying, you know what, I'm out of here. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to put myself at risk. I'm not going to be in a place that beats me up because I was honest, or that makes me cut my estimates just to say that I'm going to meet a deadline that's impossible. So, but you have these difficult conversations with your boss. You say the things that are honest. You have integrity. Okay, so what happens? So they fire you. As I said, there's plenty of work in PHP. There's plenty of work. There's billions of lines of PHP code. Some of these organizations you don't want to work for, and that's fine. Some of these organizations are really great, and that's great. But there's plenty of work. The worst thing that can happen to you is that they can fire you and you go do something else. That's really the bottom line. And I don't mean to be glib. I know finding a job is hard. I know finding work it can be challenging. But having integrity and having the willingness to say, this is what I can accomplish, or this is what I'm going to do for you, is so much more important than any one single role that you have. Having that integrity is so critical, because other people are going to notice that you have integrity, and that's going to be the reputation you have in the community. And someone who has that integrity is going to be trusted more than someone who, makes estimates or commits to things that they can't accomplish. Something else I've learned is that authenticity matters. Being authentic is an important part of being someone in the community. And as a trans person, I'm work to be authentic every day. I live out my authenticity, and I wrote this about a year ago, maybe, or 6 months ago, about authenticity. Too many people focus on what others expect or want them to be, and too little time focusing on who they really are. I think it's important that you be authentic so that you can be the person that you are, and so that you can be the person that you want to be. If you're passionate about something, that passion should show through. If you are interested in something, that interest should show through. If you are a certain way, that should show through. Authenticity matters because you are a person. This isn't permission to be unprofessional or not do the things that need to be done in a business, but it is permission to be yourself and to be true to yourself. And the truth of the matter is that not everyone will love you in the world if you are yourself, but the people who do love you will love you for you. They will care about who you are. I'm not everyone's cup of tea. I never have been. been in controversies. I remember beating up on Laravel quite a few times when it was, version 5 and 6. I wouldn't do that now. I'm a different person than I was then. But the people who agreed with me, we still did some good work together, and we had some good conversations. And I wouldn't necessarily trade those experiences for anything. And I being myself, again, not everyone loves me, but the people who do love me for who I am. So as a developer, it's important to contribute back to the community. It's important to remember that there's a community of people that we're all a part of, and it's important to give back to that community. Open source work is difficult. It's important. It powers much of the internet, and it doesn't make anybody a whole lot of money. If we had to pay a license fee for every piece of software that we use, no software would ever get built, or it would be ridiculously and prohibitively expensive. But it's also important to remember that open source isn't just about the code, okay? Just because you don't have time to write code for open source doesn't mean you can't contribute. It's important to contribute to open source, and it's possible to contribute in other ways. You can encourage your company to sponsor an open source project that they use. This is a financial way of of contributing to open source software. It's a great way to do it. Not everybody is going to do this. Not every company is going to do this. I wish they would, but they're not. You can write documentation. So I have Karma to vote on RFCs in PHP. I got this Karma by writing PHP documentation. That is how I vote on things in PHP, is I help write some of the documentation. And documentation is extremely important, because when you write documentation, you help other developers. Similarly, if you blog about your favorite tools, or you blog about what you're doing. Right now, I'm working on a blog series about how to use GitLab to build Docker containers and ship a Dockerized application. I think this will be valuable to somebody who can take this and learn from it and learn how to use Docker. It's not documentation, but it's like a step-by-step. Here's how I did it. Here's how I think you can do it yourself, using Docker, Ansible, GitLab, all of those things together. So you can write these blog posts about your favorite tools and help people to learn, and can help people to grow their experiences in the community, and to learn how to do things. And this goes back to, teach something to someone else. You have something to teach. So blog about it, create a video on YouTube, whatever it is that you want to do it, and you can contribute back to the community in that way. The last thing I learned early on in my career is that meeting your heroes is okay, because a lot of them are just like you. I remember the first conference I went to. It was ZenCon in 2008, and I met. I think Zeev was there, and Cal Evans was there, and there were a lot of people from the PHP community there, and I was kind of starstruck. But I very quickly learned that these people are just like me. They like to go out and grab a drink after work. They like to have a good time. They share their knowledge not because they're celebrities or because they necessarily know more than I do, but because they care to teach something to somebody else. So the people who blog, the people who write code, I've met Taylor Otwell, very nice guy, very down to earth. I've met Rasmus Lordorf, who created PHP. I've met Zeev. I've met Andy. I've met all of these people. They're really down to earth human beings. And so, take time, if you go to these conferences, to meet your heroes in PHP. Now, I can't say this is necessarily true for movie stars or politicians or whatever, but I can tell you that in the PHP community, these people are really down to earth. These people are really realistic and kind people who just want to help move software development forward. So with that, here is to 20 more years of PHP. Eventually, I guess no one will write PHP, but may that not be in the next 20 years. And I encourage all of you to grow your own experiences and have those experiences that form your careers and shape your viewpoints and really help you to grow as developers. So with that, I'll open it up to questions. and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
If you if you don't want to talk, I'll ask you a question. You can type in the chat. Unless you want to speak and ask it, might be a bit quicker.
Thoughts, comments? I'll take those too.
I can ask one more.
Uh-huh.
So you've asked about preferring boring stacks. How much do you think that applies to like PHP user-land libraries? Do you think it's generally worth avoiding adopting a new library, or like being an early adopter of a library before lots of other people are using it?
I think in terms of user-land stacks, it's a little bit easier to adopt things. That being said, for most stacks that are not well known, like I would never write a wrapper around Guzzle necessarily. But for a library that is brand new to the community, that might not be maintained, that might go out of version, I might write a wrapper around it. You know, I might write a layer that stands between my code and that, so that if I ever come to a place where that library isn't supported or isn't maintained, I can strip that library out pretty easily and replace it without necessarily having to rewrite all of my code. And this generally works well. Where this gets tricky is when that library is extensively integrated into your code. And, you know, like for example, I like to use the Aura extended PDO library. So I actually help maintain it in newer versions of PHP so it functions. You know, and so yeah, there are cases where that's not necessarily possible, but I recommend writing a wrapper around libraries that you're not sure about or are not as popular or that you're not convinced may be around for a long time.
Thank you.
Yeah, Valiner, and I'm not familiar with the other one, Brick Date Time. So I'll have to take a look at that one. Given Valiner's development in the past, I think it may be around for a long time, and it's certainly being adopted more readily by people, but it's a really great library. And I've helped a little bit on it, as well as Marco Pivetta has helped on that as well. Sayed asked, what would you suggest a beginner's best way of gain experience and be ready for the job market? So my recommendation for anyone who is a beginner who is looking to get into the job market for PHP would be to write PHP code and have a portfolio of PHP code, and maybe contribute to a couple of open source projects, you know, fix a couple of bugs that are marked maybe as good beginner bugs or something like that. And be able to point to that and say, hey, you know, I have some experience here. I'm a beginner, but I have some experience that you can look at. You know, I'm actively contributing. You know, I wouldn't necessarily go to a library and say, hey, I'm going to introduce this big new feature that like changes everything. But fixing bugs is a great way both to contribute to open source and to develop experience, because it requires you to use a lot of different tools and a lot of different techniques. And, you know, you'll be writing a test and you'll be doing a lot of those different things. So that's what I recommend, is to, you know, just take some time to actually write PHP code that people can see and be able to show it off and say, hey, look, you know, here are the contributions I've made. And while I'm a beginner, I have experience. I hope that answers your question. Any other questions?
Yeah, I've got one as well.
Okay.
You mentioned Rust a few times. Are you
I mentioned what?
Rust, the language?
Okay.
Yeah. Is it like, are you looking into it for purely exploratory purposes, or are you aiming at doing something with it, like maybe professionally? Or I'm just curious to know what drew you to this language.
What drew me to the language is that it's new and it's popular, so it made a good example. I've looked a little bit into it. I don't know that it's ever going to be something that people dive into and write a lot of code in. But it certainly has some unique and interesting features. So I think that, it's certainly worth understanding and knowing something about. But I'm not going to drop everything to go learn it, if that makes sense. It's hard to predict what the next quote unquote big thing will be in the community or in software development. I think if Ziv and Andy or Rasmus could have predicted what PHP would do, they might have done things very differently. But I also think that, exploring new technologies, even if you never use them professionally, or even if you never see them have wide scale adoption, I don't think there's anything wrong with learning them for learning them's sake. So, I'm definitely open to those kind of things. I hope that answers your question. Great. I'm reading your comment, Barney.
Has anyone got any more
Yeah.
questions? I think we maybe got a few more minutes.
I can
Trying to
ask
think
another
of
one actually.
Okay.
Okay.
Because you've got a Mastodon account, and you were talking about building, communities and the following earlier. So maybe first question, have you been on Mastodon for a long time? And second question about that, like, what do you think about it? Do you think it's got the good potential to build communities? What's your impression of it?
My impression of Mastodon is that it has the ability to build a good community. But like any community, that's going to depend on the effort that the people who are a part of it put in. I joined relatively recently, just as I was getting ready to transition. So I have not been very active on it yet. But I followed a lot of the people that I follow on Twitter, on Mastodon if they had an account, and I do check it regularly. And it seems like, it has a lot of the features that, say, Twitter does or other social media platforms do. So, I'm hopeful, but we'll see. Somewhere will become the new community, or there, like MySpace used to be the community, right? Like everybody was on MySpace, and then it became Facebook, and then it became Twitter and whatever. So, communities move around. Is Mastodon the next big thing? I don't know yet. But maybe. For now, I'm willing to give it a shot and see whether or not it is. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I'm also asking because creating an account on Mastodon has been on my to-do list for weeks now, and I'm just looking like for a reason to do it, like a little push to actually do it. I guess I just need to give it a try. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Entropy is that's the desire to stay at rest. I can't remember what that's called. Is a big demotivator for a lot of people.
Inertia.
That inertia. Thank you. Yes, having inertia, putting something on a to-do list is not the same as doing it, and I definitely have learned that too. So. All right. Well, I will turn it back over to you, Craig.
Fantastic. Cool. So I can't seem to drag it to the other screen. That's okay. Great. So thank you very much, Sarah. I mean, I kind of taken quite a lot of notes. Even I myself have been in the community for 12 years, I think, as a developer. Almost 10. I think 10 have been in the community. So that was something that I did quite early on in my career when I had a couple of jobs in PHP. I think I went to my first conference in 2008. And then from then on, I think since maybe 2010, I've been either a user group organizer or a founder. I founded a user group, and I've been as of June, it would be 7 years that I've been a co-organizer of PHP London. So it's quite a while. And I think what you mentioned about being part of a community, I've definitely felt that. I've met a lot of people. I've met heroes, I've met good friends from all over the place, not just London, and it's why I like going to conferences, right? See your friends. They're not just people who you use their code, they're also friends, and I think that's really helpful. It's helped me in my career. I know there's I've got I've been able to get jobs just because I've got PHP London on my CV, and people are like, oh wow, what's that? And you can then say, I'm part of a community, I organize things, and then suddenly it's you're not just it kind of makes you stand out a little bit, is what I'm kind of getting at. So you're not just you want, I think I can't remember who was asking about earlier about how you could stand out in the job market as a junior, especially things like that, joining communities. I don't know if if you're a Drupal person, maybe sign up for Drupal and then do some bug fixing and put that on your CV. Any kind of code you put on GitHub, put that on your CV, because that's what makes you stand out from other juniors or anyone else who's just starting out. Cool. Well, I think that is all for me. Once again, I'd like to thank our sponsors. I know Jids is on, and I think is Levi still on?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Craig. Hi. Thanks. I just wanted to add to what you just mentioned about people looking in the job market. This is what I do for a living, and really, it's about joining those communities and looking at where you want to sort of get involved, but how you express that, I know what recruiters look for. It's all about the who, what, where, when, and if you can show that, like when did you do it, who you were working with, and the how, there's a lot more that's going to sort of jump out. Like, I know people do a lot of key wording within there, but it's people like myself who may not be actual developers. You just need to see what the context of it is, and if you find the right market sort of expert, there are definite opportunities. Like, I know plenty just go for like a high level or a mid level, but there are so many entry level or just sort of graduate level, even, so to speak. But and also Sarah mentioned about teaching yourself. Many people have, there doesn't necessarily need to be that certification, but show your workings, get those GitHubs and those accounts and profiles, because that is worth so much more, as well as just basic experience, because you're showing methodology, you're showing what you can do in that environment. So yeah, I just want to add that.
great. Yeah. Also the blogs. I mean, I had a blog a long time ago, and the number of times, even probably Sarah, you might have seen this, where you blogged something, and then you Googled. You've been in a situation where you Google, oh, I've got this problem, and then you Google it and you realize you wrote about it on your own blog 6 years earlier. The amount of times I see that on Twitter, it always makes me chuckle. So even if no one's looking at it, you know, there's always benefits that you can come back to. I got so much notes and stuff everywhere on my laptop for, you know, code snippets and all kinds of stuff that I've written that I can always refer back to. So definitely. Great. So I think we'll probably wrap up. But yeah, once again, thank you, Sarah, especially on quite short notice. I think it's only last week when I got in touch with you, and you know, I was very gracious to accept. And yeah, it was a great talk.
Thank you.
You know, I've definitely picked up some things that I can use going forward. You know, even after being in the community for quite a while as well. Cool. If anyone's got no more questions, so we will be back next month. So we do have a speaker for next month, which is all good, and that will be the first Thursday. So I think it's the second of February. The venue is all booked. The pizzas and drinks will be provided. And yeah, I think that's everything. Yeah, Barney confirmed that it is the second. I put in my calendar, so or yeah, I looked earlier, so and I rechecked the speaker. He's all confirmed, so that is all good. So yeah, once again, I'd like to thank everyone for attending. I know you've probably all been at work all day. It's always a long day, past 8. And yeah, once again, I'd like to thank Sarah, and yeah, thank you for attending, and we'll see you next month. Bye-bye.
Thank you all for having me.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.